Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike here at Gamefromscratch, and today we're going to be looking at some of the biggest game development fails of all time. There have been some doozies. I'm guessing you guys can guess number one. I've grouped some of these together where they make sense logically, and let's just jump in. We'll look at some of the biggest fails in the history of game development. And first off, we're going to start off with CryEngine. Now, CryEngine is still around, somewhat amazingly. I'm not going to get into too much detail about this, but Crytek, the company, wow, do they have a history of screwing up. So there's not really one specific thing. It's just Crytek has just been generally a painfully poorly run company with a history of layoffs and problems and unpaid employees and everything else. If you want to read more about it, do check this out. I did a recent video this year about what happened to CryEngine. Now, CryEngine is a very interesting one to start with because part of what happened, one of the earlier screw-ups with CryEngine, Crytek ran into so much problems with money that they actually sold a license to their game engine to Amazon, who made Lumberyard, who also make it on this list. Congratulations, Amazon. See, Amazon decided to build their own game engine. They would give it away to everyone else for free as long as you used their gaming services. The thing is, Amazon spent hundreds of millions of dollars setting up game studios, making Lumberyard a thing, and as far as I know, there has been one successful Lumberyard game, which is the New World. You can also argue Star Citizen, but that one is more of a licensing loophole about Crytek than it is about Lumberyard. But Lumberyard was definitely a fail from Amazon perspective. Now, interestingly enough, though, it did ultimately result in them open sourcing it as O3DE. And right now, O3DE is actually going quite well. I'm not including them on this list as a fail because, again, I think O3DE has a lot of potential in the end. But Lumberyard, oh, for sure, Lumberyard was a fail. And Lumberyard would have never existed if Crytek didn't fail so hard going back in the day. So that's kind of number one with a bit of an honorary mention number two. Now, that's, I guess, number 8, if we look at it that way. Now, next up, we have another kind of catch-all, and that is Autodesk. Now, everything Autodesk touch, they kill. Other than, Max Maya, pour one out for Softimage, though. Autodesk has a history of buying game middleware and then killing game middleware. So what does that include? Well, that includes Scaleform, which used to be the UI layer for every game ever made. I'm exaggerating, but only just a little bit. Yeah, Autodesk bought that and killed it off. Now, again, a lot of that was, Scaleform was built on top of the Flash Runtime, which Apple did a very good job of killing off. But again, Autodesk bought a lot of things. Scaleform, Beast, Human IK, Navigation, they were all killed off. And so was, Stingray. Stingray was a license of BitSquid. It was basically the engine behind Vermintide and similar games, including to this day. There's still actually games being made with Stingray or what existed before Stingray. Yeah, they killed that as well back in 2018. So once again, even when they tried to get into the game engine market, Autodesk ultimately killed that off as well. So they killed off the number one UI library out there and a very promising game engine. So hey, good work, Autodesk. Please stop buying game development companies. And then from there, let's go mention a little bit about the developers behind Stingray, because they also made their own game engine called the Machinery. And wow, they joined the list as well. And they joined the list in spectacular form. They actually shut down in 2022. They changed their EULA and basically said, if you are using our product, the license is terminated. After 14 days of this notice, you are requested to delete your copies of the Machinery. So yeah, they shut down, and all of their licensees, they basically said, you have to shut down too. You can't use this code anymore. And off it goes. It was insane. All of these paying customers basically got the rug pulled out from underneath them. I've never actually fully heard why they had to shut down in such a draconian manner. But yeah, they terminated everyone's licenses. They destroyed all the source code of the Machinery. So obviously it was kind of in a licensing issue that was serious enough to do this. But basically they self-destructed overnight. This was definitely a big strike against using a proprietary game engine and a big argument for, going with something either open source like Godot or source available like Unreal Engine. Although, ironically enough, the Machinery was source available and they still shut it down and made everyone delete their source code. So that one was probably the most drastic of the things you're going to see on this list. But that's not the most insane. Now, one of the most insane had to have been this one. Buildbox. Now, Buildbox was been around for a very long time. It's a codeless 3D game engine. It's basically designed to make building games super, super easy. They've kind of changed their business model a couple times. It used to be a really expensive product to license. Then they moved over to a different licensing system where they made it more accessible to the masses, and then they changed their licensing system again to perhaps the most insane licensing revenue split that was ever announced in the history of ever. They went to a 70-30 split, and you may be thinking, oh, that's not so bad. That's basically 70-30 is what you pay if you are on, say, Steam. You give 30% to Steam. Oh, no. You got that backwards. They wanted 70% of your revenue. So you could use Buildbox, but you had to give them 70% of what you made. Yeah, that kind of killed them almost overnight. They're still around to this day, but they had to walk this one back for sure. The whole thing was just absolutely insane. And yeah, so they made some absolutely nuts changes to their pricing, and Buildbox I don't think has been really that relevant ever since they pulled this little trick. Now this next one is a little bit of a catch-all, because now we're just going to talk about EA, because EA actually could make this list for 3 different reasons. One of them for sure was the Frostbite game engine. Now Frostbite is the DICE developed game engine behind, a lot of their shooters and so on. Also, I think it's used to make FIFA. It's a very successful game engine at EA from their acquisitions, but what they actually mandated is that everyone had to use it. Now, there used to be a studio called BioWare, and everyone used to love BioWare. A lot of people don't love BioWare now, and a lot of it came down to BioWare was forced to use the Frostbite game engine. A number of studios inside of EA were basically straight out forced to use this game engine, even if it didn't necessarily make sense. And yeah, there was definitely a lot of woes at EA at the time, and BioWare is an absolute shell of what they used to be. Also, keep in mind, there's other reasons for that occurring, but this was definitely a blunder. Now, since then, EA did come out and said that they were going to allow developers, like their studios, to use other engines such as Unreal Engine. So that mandate seems to have been walked back, but it was definitely a mistake. You're basically trying to put a square peg into a round hole there. Now, another one they've got, and this one isn't technically a fail from EA, it was more of a dick move from EA and a fail for the industry, is EA bought Criterion. Back in like 2004, we were talking about here, and Criterion made the, we'll call it the Unity or Unreal Engine of its day, which was a product called Renderware. Now, if you made a PS2 game, there's probably a 50-50 chance that you used the Renderware game engine for it. And they said, yeah, you'll be able to keep using it. We'll keep licensing it. We'll let all of our competitors continue to use this game engine. I think that lasted for about 3 days. And then Renderware became basically an EA-only product, and everybody that was working with Renderware, well, they kind of got screwed. Again, I think this was one by design, so you can't really call it a fail. It was like a ruthless, cutthroat business move, but it definitely hurt the game industry overall. And speaking of the game industry, well, EA makes the news one more time. This one actually has nothing to do with game engines, but I figured I should mention it here. Do you know EA actually managed to win back-to-back the worst company in the world, I think it was worst CEO in the world 2 years back to back. That was John Riccitiello was the CEO there at the time. By the way, that name, you may want to keep that in mind because he has honorably made it onto this list a couple times. It's pretty amazing how some people just keep coming back. But yeah, they had this thing where an EA spouse basically came out and talked about the working conditions for programmers at EA. Things like all 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and then when the deadlines there it got worse. Current mandatory hours were 9 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week. But basically, it came down that the working conditions at EA were just absolutely and utterly insane. And then more and more people came out and talked about it. It did lead to some changes in the industry that were somewhat positive. So that's a good thing. But yeah, EA just kind of kept making the list here. But this next one, more of a technical screw-up, but whoa, was it a screw-up. And that was Game Maker. Back then, it was made by Yo-Yo Games. Since then, it's been bought. It is now run actually by Opera. But back in the day, Yo-Yo Games did an update, and they added new DRM in, which would actually corrupt your game. So if you developed your game using a pirated version of Game Maker Studio, when your game ran, it would permanently have, like in the game assets, the source level, they would have added all these little pirate icons into it. So they're permanent changes. These are not overlay done. They physically altered your game assets to have these they are in there if you pirated Game Maker. Problem is, it also did this to non-pirated copies of Game Maker as well. So basically, Yo-Yo Games did digital graffiti over their paying customers' work because this whole DRM system screwed up. That was not a good one. That was a bad mistake for sure. So that was a big mistake back in 2012. So it's been like 13 years, and it still managed to be the second dumbest thing that game engines have managed to do. So we're at the final biggest screw up in the history of game engines. Can you guess what it is? I'll give you a hint. Remember JR, John Riccatello, the CEO, the worst CEO in America 2 years in a row? Well, he went on to a new company, and that company was Unity. And he did something that got him fired. Yeah, he is no longer the CEO of Unity. They're actually almost the entire C-suite at Unity is gone because of this one. And this was back in 2023. Unity decided what they were going to do is charge developers 4% of everything, ever. Anytime. If you made a product using Unity 10 or 15 years ago and you used the Unity runtime, which, by the way, if you make a game using Unity, you had to pay and use the runtime. It wasn't an optional thing. So basically, they wanted to retroactively charge every single one of their developers a fee per install. So if you made a game 10 years ago with Unity and it did 100,000 installs, they wanted $20,000. They were going to go to, like, this would have got them sued into oblivion if they actually went ahead with this. But this retroactive changing of their EULA and trying to charge a per install fee for all of their things, and they were going to change it going forward as well. So basically, any new game developed, they were going to use this per install for the runtime fee. The whole thing was just, it was quite literally the dumbest thing that ever happened in the world of game development. And the funny thing is, I'm part of the Unity Insider program, and I talked to the person who is no longer with Unity in advance of them launching this. And my advice was, don't. This will destroy your company. This is the dumbest thing you could possibly do. And I'm not alone in giving them that advice. I know a lot of people inside of Unity gave them that advice, and I know a lot of people outside of Unity that were aware of what was going to go on gave them the same advice. But they went ahead and did it. And the fallout is Unity lost billions upon billions of dollars in market share over this one. The entire C-suite is gone. Pretty much all of the people from ironSource are now gone. It's a completely new company. They took such a huge reputational hit that it is just starting to get better now. So this is definitely the biggest screw up in the history of game development. And then they took like a month almost to walk this back. And then it was almost a year to the date where they got rid of the runtime fee going forward. So this was definitely the biggest screw up in the history of game development. And that's my list, ladies and gentlemen. Do you have anything else? Can you think of other massive screw ups that should be somewhere on here? I think we could probably fit Flash in here somewhere, but we already kind of talked about it a little bit with the whole scale form part. But what else would you consider massive screw ups in the world of game development? I'd be interested in hearing. Let me know. Comments down below. Talk to you all later. Goodbye.